Lesson 8-3, Properties of Multiplication. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to use multiplication properties with fractions, as well as find the reciprocal of a number. Make sure you have your piece of paper and your pencil handy so you can take notes as we go along and work these right along with me. So the first one we have is the commutative property. That says A times B equals B times A. So for example, we would have 2/5 times 5/6 is equal to 5/6 times 2/5. So if we were going to go ahead and multiply these, we could see that as we cross multiply, we can cross out here this 5 and 5, and those equal 1. This 2 and the 6, 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 6 three times. So this side is going to equal 1/3 is equal to, now let's take a look at this side. We can cross out these 5s and they equal 1. Cross out 2, and 2 goes in there one time, and 2 goes into 6 three times, and that equals 1/3. So the commutative property, remember, I want you to think order. You can switch their order around and they're still equal. Next we have the associative property. A times B in parentheses times C equals A times B times C in parentheses. The associative property, one way that I try to help kiddos remember that is an associative is someone that, it sounds kind of like an associate, someone that you're with. So here we've got groupings. A is with the B, B is with the C. So when you see these parentheses in one, you know that it's the associative property because they're with someone else. They're associating with someone else. That kind of helps you because I know there's a lot of properties. It helps to have little tricks to remember them along the way. So here's the associative property written out with an example. We have 1/3 times 1/2. Then you multiply that times 14, which is equal to 1/3 times 1/2 times 14. So then when we work this out, we can see that they are still equal. So we have 1/3 plus 1/2, and we multiply that first, and we get 1/6 times, we bring that 14 straight down, but I'm going to turn it into a fraction so that way it's ready to multiply, equals 1/3, we bring that straight down, times, now we have 1/2 times 14. That would be 14 over 2. Now I can go through and reduce. So I have right here these 1s, those just stay. Then I have a 6 and a 14. I know that 2 goes into both of those. 2 goes into 6 three times. 2 goes into 14 7 times. So now I can multiply. 1 times 7 is 7. 3 times 1 is 3. And that's equal to, over on the right side, the 1 and the 2 I can't do anything with. The 3 and the 14 I can't do anything with, but I can reduce my 2 and 14. 2 goes into 14 7 times, and 2 goes into 2 one time. So now I have 1 times 7 is 7, and 3 times 1 is 3. So those are equal. So remember the associative property, you can think of that as grouping with their friends or their associates. So when you see the associative property, that's grouping, whenever you see those groupings. Okay, now we have the identity property. And one way to look at this is I look at this I here, and it reminds me of a 1. So the problems that have the times 1, they're multiplying times 1, that's the identity property. It also, your identity is the same as you, so you can think of that also as same. So in this example, we have A times 1 equals 1 times A, which really just equals A. So here that is with an example. 4 7ths times 1 is equal to 4/7. We can also write that as 1 times 4/7 equals 4/7. So we know that whenever we multiply any number by 1, it stays the same. Next up, we have the zero property, which is a times 0 equals 0 times a, which ultimately will just equal 0 because any number times 0 equals 0. So the zero property, you're going to just think 0. So when we look at that as an example, we would have 3/4 times 0 equals 0. We can also write that as 0 times 3/4, which also equals 0. Our last one is distributive property of multiplication over addition. This one says a times b plus c is the same as or equal to a times b plus a times c. So you've distributed this a to both other variables. I've distributed the a to the b right here, a times b, and then I distributed the a to the c. So we have a times c. And we add those together because that's what we were doing here. So the distributive property means you're distributing this number outside the parentheses to both numbers inside the parentheses. So that as an example with numbers would be 1/2 times 4/5 plus 2/5 equals 1/2 times 4/5 plus 1/2 times 2/5. So let's take a look at that as we work it out. We would multiply this 1/2 by each of those. First we would add up 4/5 plus 2/5. So we still have the 1/2 times 4/5 plus 2/5 is 6/5 equals 6/10. So now on this side we have 6/10. So I'll rewrite that here in green so you can see that that red was just my work. 6/10 equals, now I'm going to go back up and I will do the right hand side. So we have 1/2 times 4/5. So that would look like this. 2 goes into 2 and 4, 1 time here and 2 times. So 1 times 2 is 2 over 5 plus, now I need to do my other parentheses here. These 2's are going to cancel out into 1's. So 1 times 1 is 1 and 1 times 5 is 5. Okay, so now I need to add these together. So I bring my 6/10 down and I have that didn't write right, 6/10 equals, then I'm going to go ahead and reduce that. So 6/10, I'm going to divide those both by 2. So this would be 3/5. Okay, so I have 3/5. And now I add my fractions. 2 plus 1 equals 3/5. So 3/5 is equal to 3/5. For the last part of the lesson, we have reciprocals, or multiplicative inverses. So that's two numbers with a product of 1 are called reciprocals or multiplicative inverses. So that looks like this. If we have 3/4 times 4/3, we can cancel those out. Let's see what that equals. We're going to cancel those out. 3 and 3 are both divisible by 3 and we get 1's. 4 and 4 are both divisible by 4 and you get 1's. So that equals 1. So if this happens, we know that 3/4 and 4/3, they're reciprocals. They're flipped over from each other, so they're like the opposite. We also can show that with 6 times 1/6. If we need to multiply a whole number, we can put it over 1 and that doesn't change its value. Then we can cross these out because they're both divisible by 6. That equals 1. So now we just have 1. All that we were left with is 1s. So when we're finding the reciprocal of number, we wrote the number here. We wrote it as a fraction. Then we inverted the fraction. So we changed the numerator and the denominator's position. Then we multiplied. So another example of a reciprocal would be 10 and 1/10. So that was an example of inverse property of multiplication, where we have A over B times B over A is equal to 1. And this only works where A and B are not equal to 0. We can't have any of those equaling 0. So this A over B, we have the B over A is the reciprocal. We've flipped it. We've exchanged the places of the numerator and the denominator. So go ahead and rewatch any parts of the videos before heading off to do today's math assignment.